Button.
Welcome to the healthiest half hour anywhere on the internet today. Hi, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll, and this is the Exam Room Live brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Appreciate you taking some time out of your day today to get just a little bit healthier with us. On tap, we've got ourselves a big show, but I must say that we have reached a regrettable milestone in the coronavirus pandemic. And experts are now saying that there's a chance that COVID-19 is here to stay, even if we develop a vaccine. And as people search for alternatives to meat in droves, a popular fast food chain in China decided to test the waters. And what happened exceeded anyone's wildest expectation. And about those mock meats, well, let's see here. What could they do in terms of lowering our risk for COVID-19? We're going to find out when we check in with Dr. Jasmol Sardana from the Barnard Medical Center. Dr. Jazz, this is a more complex issue than one might think, so I'm looking forward to catching up with you about this.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chuck.
Plus, we're going to answer a lot of your questions when we open up the doctor's mailbag. So if you have a health or a nutrition or coronavirus related question, go ahead and post that in the comments section right now. Dr. Jazz is going to answer as many as she possibly can before the end of the show. And if that's not enough, it just so happens to be National Burger Day. So I thought it would be fun if we could share some great plant-based burger recipes together. Our producer, Laura Anderson, is going to be sharing some of the recipes that we have up on pcrm.org. Right now, it's going to get us going, including a recipe for the exam room burger. This is an actual thing. Chef Lauren Kretzer put together a recipe for a delicious veggie burger. We call it the exam room burger. So we're going to post the recipe to that along with some others in there. I know that there's a portobello burger. There's a chickpea burger in there. There's a few different kinds of burgers in there, recipes for you to check out. But I also want for you to go ahead and post your favorite veggie burger recipe here in honor of National Burger Day. All right. So let's get the meat off of the plate. Let's go with veggie burgers and let's share some love today. So it's going to be a busy comment section between the questions and the recipes. Lots to discuss. But let's start everything off with a check on headlines today and 5 things that you need to know for this Thursday, May 28th, 2020. More than 100,000 Americans have now lost their lives to the coronavirus, easily making it one of the leading causes of death here in the U.S. In the span of less than 4 months, COVID-19 has already killed more people than diabetes, the flu, pneumonia, kidney disease, and suicide will each individually for the entire year. The U.S. also expected to hit another grim milestone Thursday as the total number of cases ticks past 1.7 million. Worldwide, more than 356,000 people have died from COVID-19. In other news, a new look at the per capita death rates of COVID-19 shows that while the virus is attacking more people in the U.S. than anywhere else in the world, it is most deadly in Belgium, where nearly 82 people out of every 100,000 will die from it. The top 3 is rounded out by Spain and the UK, both of which are well behind Belgium's mark. The US ranks 6th in per capita deaths with a rate of about 30 fatalities per 100,000. Meanwhile, a growing chorus of experts says it's possible the coronavirus may never be completely wiped out, even if a vaccine becomes available. Instead, they say COVID-19 will become an endemic disease, kind of like HIV or the measles. The group, which includes former CDC Director Tom Frieden, says the prudent course of action is to find ways to live with the virus safely and urges states not to rush to reopen and risk what many believe will inevitably lead to a second wave of infections. As concerns over safety at slaughterhouses continues to grow here in the States, similar concerns are bubbling up in Europe. Much like in the U.S., workers are experiencing Workers at meat processing plants in Europe are experiencing a surge in cases. At one particular plant in the Netherlands, all 600 workers are now being quarantined at home after a quarter of the staff there tested positive for the coronavirus. And in Germany, more than 260 workers tested positive at a single plant, bringing production there to a halt. More than 18,000 meat packing workers have tested positive for the coronavirus in the U.S., according to the Food and Environment Reporting Network. And last month, finally, we told you about KFC testing the waters of plant-based chicken at 3 locations in China. And now we're learning just how popular of a concept this turned out to be. The vegan chicken nuggets sold out in less than an hour at all 3 locations, according to Veg News. Now, the company is expected to put meatless options on menus at many more stores in the near future. And it was just last fall that here in the U.S., just outside Atlanta, the KFC also tested meatless chicken sandwiches. Those sold out in less than 5 hours. So, Dr. Jazz, I want to bring you into this conversation because these plant-based meats, a lot of experts will say that they are kind of a double-edged sword, right? So they're great for the environment. It's terrific that they're getting animals off of the plate. But at the same time, a lot of these options are loaded with fat and salt. So with respect to that, will these mock meats help with the underlying conditions that we hear so much about with COVID-19, like high blood pressure and diabetes?
Right. So wonderful point. And I think with these, I think that's exactly right. It's a double-edged sword. And with these mock meats that are available to us, it's exciting. It's an exciting time to be plant-based. It's an exciting time to be vegan because you're seeing meats like this much more in the forefront. Plant-based is becoming trendy. More people are learning about a plant-based diet. Now, what I explain to my patients in my clinic when I see them is that, being plant-based is a little bit of a spectrum. I think you can interpret it multiple ways. And yes, a mock meat burger that, the ones that are available on the market certainly fall into that diet. But where along that spectrum does it really fall? So you can go from unhealthy to unhealthy, right? So you can be a junk food vegan. You can eat Oreos and potato chips that are vegan, essentially, but not necessarily the healthiest for you. And that's probably where I think that I would put and place these mock meats is on this end of the spectrum, meaning that they're not a healthy alternative, and exactly for the reasons that you mentioned, Chuck. So if we take, for example, 2 of the mock meats that are widely available and are the most popular, one has a total fat total fat content, of 17 grams. And the other one has 20. So both of them roughly have about close to 20 grams of fat in 1 4-ounce patty. And honestly, when I looked up, so I also I looked those numbers up, and I also looked up a regular beef burger. And a regular beef burger from the USDA guidelines and nutrition data shows that only has 10 grams of fat. So there's actually more total fat in these mock meats. And we know that fat, specifically saturated fats, but total fats in general, are so detrimental when it comes to developing things, as you mentioned, like high cholesterol. It contributes to obesity, and all of those things together play such complex roles in developing cardiovascular disease and insulin resistance. So they all contribute to the development of metabolic syndrome, essentially. So I wouldn't classify them as health foods. The positives of it, again, I would agree with you that consuming less animal products that burden our environment, so that's beneficial for our environment. Certainly, it's wonderfully beneficial for the animals that are being spared torture and cruelty and death. But if you're eating it for the sake of your health, I would say that this has to be a once in a while treat, if at all. If you can avoid it, that's great, because you don't need those extra calories coming from total fat. So that's one reason. The amount of salt, if you take a look at it, Chuck, what the current recommendations for the amount of salt that we are supposed to get in our diet is about 2 grams, so 2,000 milligrams. If you look at the two commercially available, pretty popular patties, one provides about 360 milligrams, or about 16% of your required daily intake of sodium. And the other one has close to 600 milligrams. So over like 24% of your required daily intake of sodium. And you don't necessarily have to hit 2 grams necessarily. So these are definitely high in fat, high in sodium. And certainly for those reasons, I would say these are not as healthy. And then just to quickly add too, is that the type of fat matters, right? So saturated fats, which come from animal products, there are some plant-based sources of saturated fats, and we talk about those a lot because saturated fats have been shown to increase LDL, which is our bad cholesterol. And so that's a particular reason why these are not so healthy, because there's also saturated fat in these patties. One of the brands had about 13 grams of saturated fat, and the other one had about 5 grams of fat. So where is this coming from? There is oil in these patties. They're made out of protein, plant proteins, but in order to allow for the moisture and to mimic some of the texture of a beef burger, there's a lot of oil that's added to these patties. And specifically, there's coconut oil that's added. And coconut oil is a plant-based source of saturated fat. And if you've heard Dr. Barnard speak before, if you've heard other plant-based physicians speak before, we know that the health benefits of coconut oil are not really there. That because it's a saturated fat, that it again works similar. It can work similarly in worsening our LDL numbers, and those have negative consequences down the line when it comes to developing chronic diseases and cardiovascular disease.
Devil's advocate, though, I've spoken with Dr. Barnard about this extensively. Is there a value in these types of foods, though, in transitioning to a plant-based diet? Because for a lot of people, going from eating that beef burger to eating a black bean burger, that's really jarring. And that's like a non-starter for people. They're like, no way, I can't do that. But do you see value in maybe using these types of things as a baby step toward a healthier diet in the future?
Yes, I actually think that's exactly where they should be used, right? It's when you're transitioning and potentially for treats. Number one, I just want to say, I think it's really sad that that's the truth. You're absolutely right that if having a bean burger is distasteful to us, we kind of look at that and we turn our noses up at something like a bean burger or things that are healthy. And that just speaks volumes about the messaging that we receive from childhood, right? Seeing commercials for fast food restaurants and treats and things like that. So we have to actually acknowledge that. So that's really powerful and important to kind of touch on the fact that we're not used to this eating healthy, and that's a sad state. But yes, using these mock meats and burgers as transition foods, I think are wonderful. And you actually make a really good point too, that I wanted to add, is that oftentimes you're not just eating these mock meat burgers like on its own, right? You're not just eating the patty. You're eating 2 buns. You're probably going to put some vegan mayo on there. You might add a slice of vegan cheese. There might be, pickles and other things in it. So the sodium content and the fat content of that actual burger that you're eating is going to be even higher. So take all of those things into consideration. We know that the number one source of sodium in our diet is from, I'm going to give you a guess. What do you think?
So processed food, sodium, salt, like
bread.
What?
Yes.
The number one source of sodium in the diet is bread. Are you kidding me right now?
No, it was so striking to me too, just kind of learning that our commercially available breads are our number one source of sodium. And it's just, so again, and we don't taste it. Oftentimes the sodium that's in our foods aren't aren't salty. We can't taste it. It's attached to other chemicals and other kind of preservatives within the food. So we're not really tasting it, but our bodies are feeling it. So I want to make sure that, we're not just talking about the patty on its own. We're not just vilifying this. There's all these other layers of things that we're adding to it. So at the end of it, and you're probably not eating the burger on its own. You may have some home fries. You might have, something else on top of it. You may have a sweetened beverage. So yes, there are benefits to decreasing the amount of animal consumption. Absolutely. And there is a role for these meats, but be mindful of how frequently you're using them and what stage in that in your journey towards becoming plant-based, you're using them at. Because if you're using them frequently, I think you have to revisit what your true kind of goals are when it comes to your health. And then that's an important conversation to have with me or another plant-based provider or one of our wonderful registered dietitians at BMC about those questions. I think there's a role for them, but limited.
Yeah, and I think, one last thing before we open up the doctor's mailbag, I think that it would be beneficial to break them out at something like a picnic or a barbecue where that you're going to be surrounded by people who aren't plant-based eaters. You've got your friends after the pandemic and everybody's properly social distanced before then, you've got your friends, your family over who may kind of raise an eyebrow at you and say, well, why are you only eating this hippy dippy diet, man? Like, give me a burger. So you throw one of those things on the grill, you cook it up for them, as we said before, baby steps. It could just be a nice introduction food,
Absolutely. I'm right there with you. It is remarkable, the technology and the science behind building, some of these burgers. And if that's something that you're used to, and that's helpful as a transition, and if it's something that can encourage your family or your friend, as you mentioned, to consider trying it or replacing meat, that's wonderful.
All right, time now to open up the doctor's mailbag. So if you have a health or nutrition question for Dr. Jazz, go ahead right now, post it in the comments section. We're going to answer as many as we possibly can for the next 20 minutes or so. Already a lot of them starting to stream in, but let's start with one from Joel, Dr. Jazz. Joel wants to know, are eggs a really healthy or really unhealthy source of protein?
So, eggs are a source of protein. Now, where they fit into as far as really healthy or unhealthy is really going to depend on a few things. What are your goals for your health? If we're having a conversation about you decreasing or mitigating your risks of developing chronic disease, maybe you have a family history of diabetes, high cholesterol, heart disease, and you really want to reduce that risk. I don't believe that eggs need to play a role in that diet at all. In fact, I don't think eggs need to be a part of your diet, period. They're full of, yes, there's protein in eggs, but what else is in eggs is cholesterol, right? And there's been some controversy kind of debating, how good or how bad eggs are. And again, I think instead of vilifying one particular food group or item, I think you have to step back and really look at what's your goal for your health? And if your goal for your health is to be the healthiest possible, what that always comes back to, if you speak to physicians and who've looked at the evidence when it comes to nutrition, we see over and over again that individuals who do not eat eggs, who don't eat meat, who don't incorporate dairy, are the ones that have the most optimal BMI, the most decreased risk for cardiovascular disease. So if that's your goal, I would say leave the eggs. They're a source of protein, but I'm not sure that they're a good fit for an overall healthy diet.
All right, we've talked about salty foods. Now let's talk about sweet foods. We've got a question from Joseph on YouTube. What do you think of maple and agave syrup? Is it too close to a refined sugar? Should we be avoiding them?
So that's another question I get often also, because we hear carbs are bad and the next minute we hear fats are bad. Again, it all has to do with balance and understanding your goals. For sugars, certainly avoiding sugars that are refined sugars, refined flours that are white and overly processed are going to be absolutely beneficial for you. If you need to use sweeteners for your diet, if you're baking something, say you do like your coffee sweetened, using things like agave, or maple syrup as a substitute, I think is a fine substitute to use. Pay attention to the amount that you're using and pay attention to the frequency with which you're using it. I think the fact that these questions come up is really encouraging for me to hear as a plant-based physician and doctor, because it just shows me that the audience has this heightened sense of awareness and insight into their health. So these questions are awesome. I think they're a good source for a good alternative to refined sugars, but be mindful of the frequency and the amount.
All right, we've got a question from Dale following up on the sodium thing. My last checkup showed my sodium levels were below normal. Isn't it better to get too much sodium than too little?
I wouldn't say it's good to get too much sodium. We know that high sodium levels are linked with, the development of hypertension, and hypertension has multiple consequences down the line, including, as an independent risk factor for mortality, as well as contributing to the development of cardiovascular disease. So too much sodium is not a good thing. You should stay within that recommended dietary allowance, which is to get less than 2 grams or 1,500 milligrams of sodium. And if your sodium was low, again, the other thing I talk to about my patients is that when you get these lab results, is to not hang on one lab result either, right? So our labs are dynamic, our blood pressure is dynamic, things change, they're not static, it's just a snapshot. So if you've had an abnormal lab result, I would say repeat that, talk to your physician about that, not to get too hung up on it, and don't shoot for overdoing the sodium because there are consequences.
All right, Dr. Jazz, I think you're the perfect person to answer this next question because you are a parent yourself. This one comes to us from KC on YouTube. What are your thoughts about giving transition foods to children?
Oh, yes, really good point. It depends on your family. So some families, transition foods, I think are helpful. So since we've been talking about mock meats, I think it's helpful in families who are maybe used to eating red meat and that's part of your diet. And so that kind of palate is part of your family diet. And that might be helpful. I would strongly, as much as able, avoid it in children if they're able to, as infrequently as possible, just because, again, they're high in fat, they're high in sodium. And we certainly know that the obesity rates in children have skyrocketed. And again, transitioning eventually to a whole food plant-based diet, I think is wonderful, or fully. And if you need this for a short period of time to help your family get through it, great. But again, my advice is not going to change as much as you're able to decrease the introduction or having your kids eat these transition foods as much as possible. But if you need it to help you get to that next step, okay, but use it sparingly. And there's some families that, if your family doesn't eat meat to begin with, you may not need these transition foods because what they're really trying to do is mimic the same kind of flavor and texture of meat. And some people don't really want to eat that, right? And some children maybe have never eaten that way. So it wouldn't really make sense to introduce this taste to them to transition. There are other things they could use, but be really mindful and use it very, very sparingly, if at all.
Oh, man, our producer, Laura Anderson, is on point today. She just posted a link to your blog with tips and recipes for eating with plant-based kids. That's amazing.
Oh, awesome. Great.
Dami checking in on YouTube. Greetings from Ireland. Well, hello, Dami in Ireland.
Wow, greetings.
I recently became vegan and am getting frustrated with family members who want to eat meat and are not excited with me about the beautiful food that I'm cooking. Any advice?
So I think we have to be respectful of each person's personal journey. And Chuck, you and I have kind of talked about this a little bit before too. You got to do you. You have to stay the course. And I know it's hard. I know it can be discouraging when your family members, those who you would expect to show up for you in support of eating this way, aren't able to do that. But that doesn't mean that they don't love you. It doesn't mean, that you have to get upset about it. What you have to realize is that you can still do this. You can still eat this way and maybe look for support in other ways. There are Facebook groups. There are wonderful Instagram accounts that you can follow go to the PCRM website. We have a 21-day kickstart. We do health immersions. We're going to be potentially rolling out virtual group classes or nutrition classes. So there's lots of support. Yes, we would love for that to come from our family, but oftentimes if they're not able to, there are still other places that you can find that support so that you can continue on your journey and stay focused. And hopefully at some point, by you sticking to your path, you will eventually be able to inspire your family members.
All right. Another one kind of on that sweet and salty mix that we seem to be stuck on here today. We've talked about syrups. Let's talk about juices. Vincent on Facebook. Is orange juice healthy? People are saying it's not healthy because it's concentrated sugar without fiber.
That's right. So orange juice, you can find all kinds of oranges. You can find powdered, you can find frozen, you can find reconstituted, from concentrate, fresh, with pulp, extra pulp, no pulp. There's all kinds of varieties of orange juice. At the end of the day, orange juice is a really good source of sugar. And if you really want the benefits of orange juice, eat an orange. Oranges are delicious. And what you're getting that you're not getting from the juice, which you alluded to, Chuck, is the fiber. And fiber, we know for so many reasons, is so powerful and important for the health and healing of our bodies. So choose oranges. Orange juice, no.
All right. Emily on YouTube. Are there foods people with eczema should be avoiding? That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, this is something that I need to probably look into further because I don't know all of the data regarding specific foods and skin conditions, something that's, you know, exciting and interesting. I will tell you a personal story for myself. I suffered from atopic dermatitis or eczema before I became plant-based. And it was disfiguring and scarring. It was on my face. And it was just troublesome. It was, you know, I went to the doctor, I had steroids on my face, and you shouldn't have steroids on your face for too long because it can have further consequences and thin out your skin. And I started eating plant-based. I eventually ran out of that medication and then forgot to get a refill. But before I had a chance to get that refill, I realized, wait a minute, I don't have these patches that used to show up, that used to just kind of overnight come up and get worse and get flaky and dry. For me personally, what I would say is limiting dairy, limiting oil, limiting processed foods, all the things that we talk about as you're moving to a whole food plant-based diet. I'm a personal example of that. And beyond that, I think there's still probably data that's coming out, official data coming out, but try it. You know, there's not going to be too much of a loss there trying to cut out some of those foods. So try it and see what happens for you.
DL on YouTube, man, this is a great question that we haven't really spoken about yet. We talk so much about these transition foods and using them to transition to a plant-based diet, but how do you transition off of transition foods and into a plant-based diet?
Exactly. So that's going to look different for every person. You have to, and so this is why it's so important to talk to a lifestyle medicine physician, someone who understands what that even means, why it's so important to talk to a plant-based registered dietitian, because they can speak to your personal journey. Because Chuck, yours is going to look different from mine, and that's going to look different from our callers and our viewers. So where is that transition point going to happen for you? At what point? And after how many weeks will that transition happen? How many weeks will it take for you to transition off of it? That's all really going to depend on you. I would say the sooner the better. If you can, you know, transition in 3 weeks to a whole food plant-based diet, that's wonderful. But what's also important for me is not just to get there, it's to sustain yourself in that space, because that's where the real benefit lies. Is I don't consider this a diet, it's a lifestyle. So to answer that question, when should you transition off of transition foods? The sooner the better, but you have to know that when you do transition that you have those tools in place, working with a lifestyle medicine physician, working with a registered dietitian, so that you're able to sustain that way of life.
All right, Segwin's question on YouTube has the Rolling Stones now playing in my head and loop. Is brown sugar good for you?
So brown sugar is white sugar with some molasses added to it. I don't think that there is a health component to brown sugar because it is less processed. some people might think that it's beneficial, but I would say avoid it if you can. As with all sweeteners in general, the less the better.
How comes it tastes so good? Philip on YouTube wants to know. Philip wants to know, is it possible to lower PSA and what plants would help?
Yeah, so Dr. Dean Ornish has studied this extensively. Has studied prostate cancer and the role of a whole food plant-based diet in that. And PSA, when you say that, is prostate-specific antigen, is elevated in individuals who could potentially develop prostate cancer and in those who have prostate cancer. So again, there is evidence out there that transitioning to a whole food diet, so consuming legumes, whole grains, wonderful vegetables and fruits, and getting lots of hydration and avoiding things like saturated fat that comes from animal products, from cheese and dairy, will help limit that. So focusing on a whole food plant-based diet, that's what I love about a whole food plant-based diet, Chuck, is that it's not a diabetic diet, it's not a hypertensive diet, it's not a heart healthy diet, it's all of the above. So eating that way will be helpful for PSA as well. But I would also caution and tell you to talk to your doctor as well.
And Philip, I would encourage you also to go check out the Exam Room podcast on Apple Podcasts. Go to the episode that we released on May 12th. I interviewed a husband and wife who have been traveling the country in this enormous, really vegetable-covered RV. I mean, this thing, they've wrapped it with images of colorful vegetables. It's fantastic, so bright you can see them from space. But Bruce Milray is the gentleman's name, and he went on a plant-based diet, a whole food plant-based diet, after he was diagnosed with prostate cancer a number of years ago. So on this particular episode, he and his wife, Mindy, share their incredible story. So the name of that episode is One Day to Wellness, and that came out on May 12th. So head over to Apple Podcast, or really wherever podcasts are available, and check that episode out. I think that you might find some hope and some inspiration and a heck of a lot of information on that as well. Back to the questions now. We've got time for a few more. This is a great one coming to us from YouTube. J.A., what can I use for salad dressing that is low fat and vegan?
So balsamic vinegar. I love making dressings with that, or using that, just spritzing that on my vegetables. There are, honestly, if you go to the grocery store, this is a good, or online, doing some research and just looking to see what's out there, because I might be able to suggest something today, but there's probably 10 new products that are coming out. And they're wonderful recipes that you could find online to make your own dressing. I would say that's probably the best dressing to use, is the one that you like the most and the one that you can make. And it's easy enough to use vinegar and to use spices and to create a dressing. You could use, so we think of vegetables as things that we roast and we cut up and eat, but you can make a sweet potato dressing. You can make dressings out of any vegetable, honestly, and add that extra layer of fiber and get an extra vegetable in. So look for those recipes that, and they're wonderful, and you don't have to add any fat to it. So there are sources online that I'm sure that you could find.
All right, two more quick questions. This one from Rosanna on YouTube. My 6-year-old won't eat beans or many vegetables, but fruit is no problem. Is it okay to allow him to eat a ton of fruit?
Yeah, so fruit is fine in the whole form, because there's fiber. And so many other healthy phytochemicals within the fruits. Making sure that they get that rainbow of fruits, I think, is important. My son loves oranges. He would eat 10 oranges a day if I let him, but I make sure that I'm incorporating all different types of fruits. And as you're doing that, sneak in a vegetable here and there. And one trick that I'll tell you as a parent is, if a child says no to a vegetable or a fruit or a food in general, that doesn't mean no forever. Keep introducing it to them. It might take 15, 20 times for your child to, say, oh, wait, yeah, I do like it. But they might. So don't stop introducing or encouraging that. So encourage a rainbow of fruits, but keep trying with the vegetables and the other foods too.
Final question of the day goes to Gina on Facebook. What do nightshade veggies like peppers and eggplant do for our health?
Oh, so interesting. To be honest with you, I don't know enough specifically about nightshade vegetables. And I know that there's a role potentially that they play in if you avoid them in autoimmune conditions. So there could be I've certainly heard and read that there is that role for them in their diet, but that again, specifics would have to be discussed with your physician. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can do a little research and revisit that on a future show. How about that?
That would be a good one. Yeah.
Okay. I like that too. And I like eggplant. Like eggplant is one of those versatile veggies as well. So that, that's going to be a great topic to cover. Right now, that is all the time that we have for the mailbag. We're going to go ahead and close that up. But if we didn't get to your question, don't worry. Keep posting them in the comments section. We keep a log of every single one that comes in, and every day we do answer some on the show. So keep on posting them, or you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Chuck Carroll WLC, or at PCRM on Twitter and at Physicians Committee on Instagram. Just make sure that when you send in those questions, you use the hashtag Exam Room Podcast. And Dr. Jazz, if someone wants to ask you a question privately, one-on-one, they can do that, as a matter of fact, by scheduling a visit with you at the Barnard Medical Center, now accepting telemedicine patients. I would imagine this, for a physician in this time, for you, this has just been super, super helpful and effective.
It's such a wonderful service it's been great for myself to have the opportunity to see my patients from home. But it's been a great service for the patients as well, who just don't feel comfortable just yet coming in to see anybody physically, but it's such a convenient thing. So yes, please set up an appointment with me if you'd like to discuss your diet, your health goals. It would be lovely to speak with you.
All right, and you see that address on the web screen right now, barnardmedical.org, or you can call 202-527-7500 to schedule that appointment. Patients being accepted across the country. The office here is in Washington, D.C., but you can be in California, New York, Washington, D.C., obviously, Maryland, Virginia, Missouri, Arizona, Colorado, Massachusetts, and Kentucky. If you live in any one of those locations, one of our doctors or dietitians would be happy to meet with you via telemedicine. So visit barnardmedical.org to make your appointment today, or call 202-527-7500. And if you haven't already done so, head over to Apple Podcast and wherever shows are available, and subscribe to the Exam Room Podcast by the Physicians Committee. Yes, we do this live show, but we also have a podcast that we've been doing for so long now, and a very special episode was released today, this morning, as a matter of fact. Stroke survivor joined me to share her story. What does she remember about that day? I can tell you, 1 minute she walked into the gym, and the next minute she's being wheeled out into an ambulance and on her way to the hospital. So we're going to go inside the mind of a stroke victim, and we'll hear about how this avid runner, who was in the best shape of her life, so she thought, how she made a drastic change to her diet to make sure that she would never be one of those 800,000 people a year who has a stroke ever again. This woman also happens to be my wife. So head on over to Apple Podcast or Spotify, Stitcher, wherever shows are available, and subscribe to the Exam Room Podcast. Julie and I will sit down and go all over what it's like to survive a stroke. It's a really meaningful conversation, and I was so happy that she was able to join us on the show, just so also I could publicly tell her that I love her, because I do. Hey, Jules, I love you. And I am certainly glad that she survived, because it was only a few months later that she and I met and began to date. So it's a really great story. So check that out over on Apple Podcast or Spotify, Stitcher, the Exam Room Podcast, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. And really, really quick, before we go, I can't wrap up without saying a special thank you to our producers, Laura Anderson and Donna Steele, and our wonderful director, Emily Colon. Could not do the show without you guys. Your help is so, so, so valuable. So thank you very much for everything it is that you are doing. And you who is watching this right now, thank you so very much for watching today. On behalf of Dr. Jazz, Dr. Jasmol Sardana, and everyone here at the Physicians Committee, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. We'll talk to you again tomorrow, right back here at noon Eastern. Until then, stay safe and keep it plant-based.